That's right. That's absolutely right. And what do you think it is something that could be, let's say, developed or created out of somebody? Like, how much percentage are you like entrepreneur, and then can you develop that, or like how much do you believe is born or created?
That whole nature nurture argument, I think what happens in modern science is that nature nurture becomes a switch. It's like, it's got to be nature or it's got to be nurture. And, so that's that like nature is what you're born with. Nurture is what is like your environment and what you learn and what you pick up on. And I feel like it's a massive combination of both. I think that in my experience, Aaron, 100% of the entrepreneurs I've ever worked with have had really traumatic childhoods. They might not know it, but they have. They've experienced a tremendous amount of pressure and noise in their lives. They've usually have some serious childhood wounds of like not being seen, not being heard, not being understood, being abandoned. Like those types of feelings carry forward with them in life. And I think it's a lot of what drives us to be successful. And it's also a lot of what allows us to be entrepreneurs. I always tell people, you are bound to repeat the energetic of your childhood until you take time to process it and understand it. And I think for a lot of us, we are repeating the energetic of our childhood. It's uncertain, it feels unsafe, it feels overwhelming, there's too much to do, there's not enough time. That's where most entrepreneurs live. But when we take the time to process what's happened to us, to understand our trauma through a number of modalities, I've used quite a few, we regulate our nervous system, we get into our bodies, and we start making decisions from not a heady, logical, like overclocking, trying to push everything through space. We start making decisions from a place of our heart and our feelings and our instinct and our intuition, and really everything changes when you can make that transition.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I kind of take from this is everybody has trauma, though. That's the thing. Like
100%.
Yes, every entrepreneur has had trauma and has problems and has things that have affected them. But I want to say here on planet Earth, it is pretty much impossible for a person to have an untraumatic life. I mean,
doesn't happen.
You see what I'm saying? So it's almost like, yeah, every entrepreneur has had problems because you're on planet Earth, buddy. Like, we have issues, right? Anywhere, in your city, in your state, in your country, on the planet, globally, environmentally, politically, wherever. So I feel like that is a human condition. And in what you're putting forth, like, yes, we've all had issues, and I really sincerely believe that. I also think that any person who can self-describe themselves as, hey, I am entrepreneurial, right? I can take risks and make big things happen. That could be a switch that a person just needs to turn on, and you can become one from not being one, right? Because think about it, like, it's just an idea. You can hold on to it. Hey, I am this type of person who can do big things. And in that one statement, in that one moment, I believe you could go from not being the type to becoming the type. What do you say to that?
We call those people seekers. I have a framework called the Billionaire Code, and it's the 9 levels you go through to go from 0 to 100 million. Anybody who wants, you can check it out at billionairecode.com. And that first level of entrepreneurship, we call it seekers. It's the people who say, hey, maybe, maybe there's something more here. Maybe I can do something here. Maybe I can help more people. Maybe I can make a bigger difference. And I personally think anyone can be an entrepreneur. If they're thinking about should they, then the answer is yes. Yes. And your mind wouldn't make it up unless you had the capability to do it. But I think what happens to so many of us with our personality type is the suppression that we experience as children is massive. Like, I don't know about you, Aaron, but I was a very different kid. And I don't know, like, if you relate to any of this, I'd love to hear it. So I was so different that, like, adults would attenuate their voice. They'd be like, look, there's Katie and Aaron and Alex. And I knew, like, I could hear it, I knew I was that different. And I was so different that I really had a hard time finding any place that I belong or any place that I fit. Mm-hmm. And so for me, entrepreneurship was like, I have a hard time following anybody else's rules. So I went in this direction that honestly didn't feel risky. It felt much less risky to do my own thing than to have to follow somebody else's rules. It felt much less risky to kind of forge my own path than to try and like fit into a box. And so for me, it was like the entrepreneurial personality was like a 10 out of 10 from a very young age. I think for some people, you know, the suppression we have, like in school, I used to ask a lot of questions. I asked sincere questions and I would get in trouble. I asked sincere questions in Sunday school and they told my parents not to bring me back. You know, wow. I was that kid that like I was very curious and a lot of inquiry. And so what would happen is I would show curiosity and it would get suppressed. I would show inquiry, it would get suppressed. I would be confused, I would be suppressed. And so for a long time, I didn't trust asking people questions. I still have a hard time asking for help. I don't know about you, but like, if I have to ask somebody for help, even my wife, there's this temporary feeling of feeling vulnerable and exposed. And so I think what happens to so many people who could be out changing the world is that their environment repeatedly suppresses them as children and in young adulthood, and then maybe even throughout their lives. And so they have this like, maybe I could do this, but then that suppression is pushing them backwards. And when we understand our personality type, when we understand the attributes of the entrepreneurial personality type, when we understand who we are, how we're driven by momentum, we start realizing that this question in our head of can I really isn't a question, it's a mission.